We all heard the same thing every Halloween night from our parents when we were kids. Do not eat any candy until I inspect everything in your bag. Filthy candy thieves. Get your own bag. They told us they were checking for tainted candy. They'd vaguely recalled the details of an investigative report they saw in the local news about neighborhood occultists hiding razor blades in apples.
Candy tampering.
Needles and other sharp objects.
One of the worst nightmares for parents.
Have we got your attention?
So all these years later, we want to know, were any of those Halloween stories about deadly candy true? Today on Weird History Food, we're going to find out whether or not all those stories about razor blades and apples are true or not. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel and let us know in the comments below what other weird food urban legends you would like to hear about next. And now, let's go trick or treating. If you ever went out trick-or-treating as a kid, chances are incredibly high that your parents insisted on inspecting every individual piece of Halloween candy you brought home. They'd dump the contents of your bag on the dinner table, pick up each item, and give it the once-over. Then they'd place said items in one of two piles. One pile was reserved for clean, factory-sealed candy with familiar name brands that showed no signs of a third party's foul play. The other pile was designated for loose goods, weird oddities that looked suspect. Homemade Rice Krispie treats covered in saran wrap? Oh, that's suspicious. Fruit? Oh yeah, you can mess with that. Popcorn balls? Sticky and suspicious. Cigarette lighters? Oh, how'd that get in there? Basically, anything homemade or unwrapped or sealed in a wrapper that looked like it might have pinhole-sized punctures had to be immediately thrown away, if not set on fire at the police station. For the most part, your parents' hearts were in the right place. They grew up watching salacious prime-time investigative television journalism about the supposed deaths of children who succumbed to tampered Halloween treats. You also have to remember, this was decades before the internet. Today, with a quick Google search, any myth or urban legend can be confirmed or debunked in seconds, because everybody knows what's on the internet is true. But up until the early to mid-90s, we all just sort of accepted certain things like, you may be handed candy on Halloween that can kill you. In a pre-internet world, the idea of dealing with neighborhood creeps giving away strychnine-laced abba-zabbas was just the cost of being a kid in America on Halloween night. And pretty much everyone was willing to roll those dice in exchange for 2 pounds of free candy once a year. The thing is, journalists never reported the fact that kids were 12 times more likely to die from being struck by a car on Halloween than to receive a deadly treat by the local wacko. But their narrative changed in 1959. After the Halloween of '59, the once carefree ritual of trick-or-treating would never be the same again. That was the year the media discovered William V. Shine. William V. Shine was a successful and respected local dentist who lived in Fremont, California. He was married, in his mid-50s, and neighbors said he was kind, but mostly kept to himself. Then, on Halloween night in 1959, Shine handed out approximately 450 loose aloe pills, a mild form of laxative, to the neighborhood trick-or-treaters for no apparent reason. You know, apart from the lulz. According to old news reports, the local authorities were able to easily trace the pills back to Shine's house in less than 24 hours. But by then, he was on the lam. For 2 years, he would deny distributing the pills until 1961, when he was forced to admit everything to a state dental review panel in hopes of salvaging his license to practice. Shine eventually insinuated that it was a playful Halloween prank, but the damage was done. Although he never tampered with candy and no kids were ever reported to have taken Shine's pills, it was the first time the media was able to loosely associate tainted treats with Halloween, even if they were just over-the-counter laxatives. Which, while not exactly on the same level as hidden razor blades, it is still a cruel and potentially dangerous prank to pull on a 6-year-old in a John Cena costume. Oh wait, John Cena hadn't been invented yet. Who were kids dressing up as in 1959? Oh yeah, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The media would eventually even give Shine's act a catchy name, Halloween sadism, a perfect shorthand term for all the alleged danger the holiday poses to children. 5 years later, Helen Pfeil would give the hysteria even more fuel. Pfeil was an average 47-year-old housewife from Long Island and joked to friends that she was fed up with all of the teenagers who were still trick-or-treating in her neighborhood, years after she thought they aged out of it. So, on Halloween 1964, Pfeil gave every teenage trick-or-treater a homemade gift she assembled earlier in the day. Each package contained one of 3 gag prizes: dog biscuits, steel wool pads, or bottle cap-shaped ant buttons, packed with insecticide, which were clearly marked with a skull and crossbones. Pfeil told the teenagers the packages were a joke when she handed them out. The following day, a parent must have gone to the authorities because Pfeil was hauled in for endangering children, a charge she later pleaded guilty to. And she did technically hand out poison to trick-or-treaters. No matter how funny it seems at the time, you probably shouldn't do that. This was the second bona fide case of dangerous items being passed out to trick-or-treaters, and media outlets reacted accordingly by taking the incident and sensationalizing it as just the most recent example of an alarming trend of crazed sickos using the holiday as an excuse to abuse children. In other words, more evidence of Halloween sadism. Up until this point, Halloween sadism was a regional phenomenon. Reports from local newspapers and news broadcasts could always be counted on for sensationalized headlines about anonymous neighborhood creeps handing out deadly candy. But the country didn't really take the evils of Halloween seriously until October 28, 1970. That's the day the New York Times published an article that sort of confirmed what every skittish suburban mother had suspected forever, that there is a very good chance your kids' Halloween candy could kill them. The Times article had it all. Confirmed reports of razor blades and sewing pins hidden in apples, bubblegum sprinkled with lye, popcorn balls coated with camphor, loose sleeping pills, and red-hot oven-baked pennies that would burn children. It was pretty sick stuff. Except there was only one problem. None of the Times article's accusations were true. The journalist, Judy Clemsrud, just made it all up.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
Her goal was to get parents fired up over the dangers of Halloween, and she and the paper couldn't be bothered to back up their claims with any facts or statistics. Clemsrud's article, coupled with all of the cautionary tales parents had been rehashing for years and the crazy urban legends you'd hear at school, made it almost impossible to differentiate what was true and what was just manufactured hysteria. Manufactured, like all of that sweet, sweet candy. In many ways, urban legends are the backbone of Halloween. They're modern-day ghost stories. Someone has a friend or a cousin who once saw a kid eat a razor apple, or whose older sister drove home from Lover's Lane to find a terrifying hook lodged in the door handle of her car. Which, come on, may have just meant that AAA had a pirate working for them. All of the great Halloween lore and myths usually took flight at school. Kids sharing spooky stories during lunch about the cautionary Halloween tales they picked up from their parents and older siblings or just made up. But they all land firmly on the trick side of trick or treat. For example, there's no recorded example of a child ever receiving an apple on Halloween with a razor blade, stick pin, or sewing needle in it. As far as we know, it's just never happened.
No, it's an urban legend that never happened. We made it up.
And if you've seen old black and white images of apples with anything in them, those were staged, usually by local police or newspapers. The staged photos were intended to be used as examples, so parents knew what to look for within the Halloween treats their children brought home. Instead, they just further convinced people that the urban legend about razor blades and apples was 100% true. After all, if it were true, why would there be a picture of it in the newspaper? A similar urban legend about LSD-laced temporary tattoos started off the same way during the 1970s. According to the word on the street, dealers used to hand out temporary tattoos dosed with blotter acid. Because, dealers love giving away their product for free, especially to kids.
Rainbow fentanyl, pills, the colors of candy.
This is every parent's worst nightmare as Halloween fast approaches.
Depending on the region, sometimes the tattoos contained strychnine, and sometimes the dealers were also Hell's Angels. The story goes that kids would affix the dosed temporary tattoos on their body parts. The acid or strychnine would eventually seep into their body, and the high was supposed to get them hooked, thus ensuring dealers a steady customer for life. The thing is, it appears these sinister acts never took place. But that hasn't stopped us from buying temporary tattoos every time we see them, just in case. Pesky things like the truth have never gotten in the way of a good urban legend. Media-driven panics like the threat of poisoned or otherwise booby-trapped candy may seem harmless if a little annoying. But they've given some people the idea of using Halloween sadism as a diversion to cover up their heinous crimes. Yeah, it turns out murderers watch the news too. In 1974, in the outskirts of Houston, Texas, Ronald Clark O'Brien carefully emptied out a bunch of pixie sticks tubes and filled them up with poison, then planted them in his 8-year-old son's Halloween candy stash. O'Brien also gave tainted pixie sticks to his son's friends because he intended to claim that his son had fallen victim to a crazed stranger handing out toxic treats. His son was fatally poisoned, and a subsequent police investigation found that O'Brien bought a life insurance policy for his son a couple weeks earlier. His attempt to blame Halloween stranger danger failed miserably, and O'Brien was sentenced in 1984. The myth of tainted Halloween candy has also been used to misreport tragic accidents. In 1970, 5-year-old Kevin Toston went out trick-or-treating with his uncle, Henry Coleman, in a suburban Detroit area neighborhood. Later on in the evening, Coleman found Kevin unresponsive. Kevin's family must have known something nefarious happened because they immediately told police and the press that he'd been the victim of dosed Halloween candy. However, the subsequent investigation eventually found that Kevin had found his uncle's drug stash and had taken a heroin capsule. In order to cover up what could be perceived as negligence, Kevin's family had sprinkled some of the drug onto his candy to fuel the idea that he'd been the victim of a random trick-or-treat poisoning. National newspapers jumped to run with the "Poison Halloween Candy Kills Child" headlines the following day, even though that was far from what really happened. It didn't help that Kevin Toston's alleged Halloween candy poisoning occurred 3 days after Judy Clemsrud's hyped-up New York Times article. While every news story and schoolyard tale you've ever heard about razorblade apples and tainted candy are untrue, your parents were ultimately correct in inspecting your Halloween candy every year, even if it momentarily delayed you blindly tearing into your candy haul like a starving badger. While there has never been any documented evidence of a child dying or even getting sick from a Halloween treat they received from trick-or-treating, it's still not a bad idea to check. After all, there was a documented case of an actual dentist slipping diarrhea pills into the sacks of hapless trick-or-treaters. And it's not like anybody needs help getting the runs after eating a half-pound of candy on Halloween night. Ultimately, Halloween candy-related injuries have always been attributed to either targeted attacks from relatives, pranks, upset stomachs due to too much sugar, or someone who was looking to sue a candy manufacturer with deep pockets. And while it might not have totally justified your parents dutifully inspecting each and every piece, how else were they going to isolate you from your Halloween candy so they could skim their cut? And before you object, every single parent takes some Halloween candy without their child knowing. That is the whole point of having kids. So what do you think? Which Halloween urban legends did you believe as a kid? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History Food.